The murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside Saudi Arabia's consulate in Istanbul has brought unprecedented attention to the oil-rich kingdom's political elite. Chilling accounts of the killing and alleged dismembering of Khashoggi, an ally turned critic of the Saudi royal family, has dominated headlines and airwaves around the world.
Turkish investigators say they have evidence
proving how Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi
was killed and then he was dismembered.
This really is an extraordinary story.
With a bone saw, yeah.
And an autopsy expert.
And this guy.
And it's sparked an international backlash.
I'm sure the whole House will join me in condemning the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
The cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups.
Also erst einmal verurteilen wir diese Tat in aller Schärfe.
This, however, is not the first time Saudi Arabia has violated human rights, both at home and abroad. According to Amnesty International, Saudi Arabia has arbitrarily detained women's rights defenders without charge since May and continued to impose sentences of flogging as punishment on journalists such as Raif Badawi. In 2017, Saudi Arabia ranked third in countries that carried out the death penalty, right after China and Iran. Many of the executions were for non-violent crimes, according to Human Rights Watch. But perhaps most devastating in terms of human loss has been Saudi Arabia's ongoing war in Yemen. The kingdom's offensive on its poor southern neighbor Yemen is now 3 years old and has been called the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
They've destroyed the healthcare system, the education system, 2 million kids that are out of school. They've taken a country that was already poor and struggling before the war, and they've really destroyed it almost entirely. 22 million people are in need of humanitarian aid, but 8 million of those are on the brink of starvation.
Shireen Al-Adaimi is an American Yemeni assistant professor at Michigan State University. She argues that the Khashoggi case was able to grab more attention than the deaths of thousands of Yemenis, highlighting the international community's double standards when it comes to Yemen.
Simple answer is that many countries are involved in destroying Yemen alongside with Saudi Arabia, either through supply of weapons or through advising the Saudi military. And so a lot of people are making a lot of money from the conflict in Yemen.
Among EU countries, the UK, France, and Germany sell the most weapons to Saudi Arabia. Concerns that German weapons were likely being used against the Yemeni people have been discussed in the German Bundestag. Yet it was only after the Khashoggi case the German Chancellor Angela Merkel backed a freeze on arms sales to Saudi Arabia.
To place any kind of scrutiny about what's going on in Yemen, they'd have to be looking inwards as well and not just pointing blame at Saudi Arabia, because they have been helping Saudi Arabia destroy the country and starve its people.
But according to Al-Adaimi, Saudi Arabia's human rights violations have fallen off of the media's radar as well.
Where was the attention? Where were journalists? Why weren't they doing their job to the extent that, to cover the conflict?
Truth is, the attention Khashoggi's case has brought has to do with the way we, the media, has covered it.
The story has been sustained in the news for over 3 weeks now. The war in Yemen is not really on the American news agenda. It occasionally pops up, but is never really front and center the way this has been. And this story has attracted particularly the American media attention in a way that no story out of Saudi Arabia has ever.
Paul Farhi is a media reporter for the Washington Post. He's been following the story of Khashoggi closely. To him, the reason why the Khashoggi case has brought so much attention boils down to 2 main factors. First, his ties with the US and the media establishment there.
It's important that he was associated with the Washington Post. If he had been a journalist with a Saudi news agency, I don't think people would be as interested. Khashoggi was not an American citizen, but he was an American resident. He wasn't just a journalist, he was a journalist who was very plugged into the establishment here in Washington.
Farhi also says the details of Khashoggi's case may have made his story more striking to audiences in a way that Yemen just didn't.
The simple details of it are things that people can relate to. He was going to this consulate in order to get documents that would enable him to marry his fiancée in Turkey. That's a very mundane kind of detail that works in favor of the story, because everyone can relate to going to a government office.
The Saudi government initially denied any involvement in Khashoggi's disappearance. They then said he died in a fistfight in the consulate, promised a thorough investigation, and claimed Saudi leadership had no knowledge of the operation. The Saudi government then changed its story again. They admitted Khashoggi's murder was in fact premeditated.
I can't say any positive coming out of a person's murder and torture, but at the very least, I hope that this is a catalyst toward change in the relationship between Western allies and Saudi Arabia.
Things are already changing. Many media outlets and business people alike have not shown up to an international Saudi investors conference in Riyadh. The UN is calling for an international investigation, and the world is growing critical of Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has since rising to power portrayed himself as a progressive reformer.
This has completely flipped the image of Mohammed bin Salman. He came to the US earlier this year and received this very gracious reception. Oprah Winfrey, Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post and the CEO of Amazon, all of these tech people greeted him as some kind of reformer and some kind of modern figure for the Saudi state. Now the image is of this medieval closed society in which they kidnap dissidents and murder them.
In his last column published after his death, Khashoggi lamented the state of media freedom in the Arab world. In it he wrote, "Arab governments have been given free rein to continue silencing the media at an increasing rate. And if the outrage at his murder is not met with decisive consequences, many fear it might usher in an even darker age on press freedom in the Arab world and put yet another nail in the coffin of the beliefs Khashoggi lost his life for."